So coffee from farm to the cup. Probably every morning you take a cup of coffee, and probably you have wondered where this coffee comes from. Coffee has taken a long journey from the farm to the cup. There are several processes that goes through for it to turn into that delicious cup of coffee that we enjoy every day. And also, probably if you are not in regions where coffee is grown, it has also taken a long journey physically to get to where you are. So coffee is grown in different parts of the world. We have that region that is called the coffee belt, which lies between the tropics, and mostly the best coffee is grown in the equatorial region. In South America and Central America, we have coffee grown there, especially in Colombia and Brazil. Brazil being one of the largest producer of coffee in the world. Then in Africa, we have areas such as East Africa, Ethiopia, where we have Kenya, DRC, Tanzania, among others, that are some of the largest producers in this region. And then we have Southeast Asia, countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, some of the largest producers of coffee in this region. So every time you take a cup of coffee, think of equatorial region, areas that have the favorable conditions that allow the growth of coffee. The best climate, temperatures are good, soils are good, and other conditions that favor the growth of this crop. So coffee is first put in a nursery in terms of seeds, and these seeds germinate, and then they are later transplanted into the farms. So depending on the variety that you have planted, it normally takes between 3 to 4 years for the newly planted coffee tree to bear fruits, or to bear the cherries. These cherries will be in green in color when they are ripe, and they'll turn red when they are ready, and that's when they are ready for harvesting. So in the right hand side of this picture, you see the coffee tree, which has a lot of leaves, and perhaps needs to be removed to allow penetration of light, which will allow the turning of color. On the bottom side, we have a twig which has some white things. These are flowers. These are coffee flowers, and these are the ones that will turn into red fruits. Into green fruits, and then the green fruits will turn into red, and that's when they are ready for harvesting. So harvesting is done at a particular period of the year. It mostly happens during the last half of the year, between August and December. But there is an early harvesting season which starts in April. But nowadays there are some areas which are reporting that coffee is being harvested all throughout the year. This is mainly due to climate change that has occurred in some of these places. So coffee picking is normally a very labor intensive exercise because it's done manually. And what farmers do is that they pick one bean and one cherry at a time. So there are two methods of harvesting. There is one where you select only the ripe beans or the ripe berries, and then there is another one which is called strip harvesting, where you collect everything, whether it's red, whether it's green, whether it's has turned black. You collect everything, and then they are processed through what we call the dry processing. So this type of harvesting and processing does not yield the best quality. Selective picking is preferred for best quality of coffee because you only pick the ripe beans, and then you you process through what we call the wet processing, as we are going to see later. So farmers normally rotate among trees at least every 1 week or to 10 days. So coffee during the harvesting season, farmers normally rotate in among the trees in their farm every week. So here the ripe berries which are picked, especially if you are using the selective method or harvesting method, you pick the bright and deep red cherries. So once they are picked, while ensuring that you maintain the highest hygiene, they are supposed to be sorted, and this sorting is supposed to ensure that there is separation of ripe, overripe, and those which are not ripe, and then any other foreign material that may have gotten into coffee. So this selection process is to ensure that the coffee does not have any foreign materials such as twigs, leaves, and also to ensure that you separate between the grain. Remember, even when you are doing selective method or selective harvesting, there are some beans, green beans or overripe beans that will pass. So you need to separate them. You separate between the grain, between the ripe, between the overripe, and those which have turned black, because they are supposed to be sold separately. So when it comes to it's important to understand the layers of a coffee cherry, because through this understanding you can be able to understand the processes that coffee go through. So in the picture you can see some one, you see the cherry, it's full size. When you break it into two, you'll find some two seeds, and this seed normally it has different layers. So there's a top layer which is a soft skin, which is removed to give rise to what we call a parchment. And when you taste a coffee bean or a coffee cherry, you find that it is sweet. Actually, coffee is very sweet, and the processing is supposed to remove that sugary layer, which is called mucilage. Okay, as you are going to see in the previous slides, this mucilage is supposed to be removed. And then we have the parchment. Parchment is that seed that you end up with once you process the coffee, once you remove the outer layer. Then you have the silver skin, and finally the coffee bean which you consume. So once this coffee is harvested and selected in the farm, it is taken into the factory where it's processed. Normally factories are located within a short distance from the farms, and most of these factories, especially in East African countries, they are owned by farmers. So farmers have come together and formed cooperative societies where they have constructed factories for the purposes of receiving and processing their coffee. So they take them to the factories using the available means. Some use their bags, others use motorcycles, bicycles, push carts, and what is available, and depending on the volume or quantity of your coffee. So once it's delivered into the pulping station or the factory, they lay it out, or they spread out, they lay it on a spread out canvas, which is supposed to be clean. Here inspection is done to ensure that there is no presence of unripe, immature twigs, immature crops or berries, twigs, leaves, or any other foreign matter. So once the receiving clerk is satisfied that the coffee is separated properly, it's separated from the ripe and overripe are separate, and then there is no foreign material, then coffee is weighed, and they normally use a digital scale. So weighing is done at that point, and then at this point the farmer knows the quantity he or she has delivered, and this is recorded for the purposing of payment. So the farmer is supposed to be paid according to the amount of coffee that he or she delivers to the factory, and also depending on the prevailing price in the market after deducting the expenses. So once it's weighed, it is put in what we call a cherry hopper or a fruit tank. So this is where it's put as it awaits for further processing, which is known as pulping. So normally what happens is that there are several cherry hoppers or fruit tanks, and there is that separation between the overripe and ripe, even ripe cherries is maintained. So we have a tank where the even ripe are put, and these are the ones which are going to be processed first, and then we have another tank where the those which are overripe will be put, and they will be processed later. So it's very important to ensure that pulping is done within the same day of picking, because delays can affect the quality of coffee. So normally what is used in processing this coffee is a disc pulping machine, and it's normally the one that is used in the wet processing. So as we said earlier, there are two types of processing of coffee. We have the dry processing, and then we have the wet processing. Dry processing is where you pick everything and then you dry it, and then it's hulled. But wet processing is done where when the coffee is still fresh, you don't dry it fast, and this process uses a lot of water. So it's the one which is recommended in areas where there is plenty of water. In places where there is no probably water, there are water shortages, this method might not be the best. So the pulping operation takes place due to the rubbing actions between bulbs on the disc and the chop rails. It requires a large amount of water, and normally to ensure that there is no wastage, water is recirculated. So the pulping machine is designed in such a way that it can recirculate water for use, especially after filtering the skin. So the skin is removed. You can see a person holding two in one hand. They are the beans, and then on the other hand we have the skin. So at this stage we have two products: the coffee beans which have been crushed, and then we have the skin. So the skin at this stage is now a waste, but normally what happens is that it's not wasted. Farmers collect it and use it in their farms as compost manure. So it will be pumped into a skin yard, which is normally located in a place where farmers can easily access anytime and collect it and take it to their farms. So during this processing, there is also a pre-grading. So the pulping machine is structured in such a way that it can also do what we call pre-grading, where coffee is graded into parchment 1, 2, and the lights. The next process is where coffee now is fermented. The parchment is fermented, and this is a chemical reaction that breaks down the mucilage, that sugary layer, and ensures that coffee acquires a good taste. So fermentation allows the mucilage on the parchment to be washed off easily. So different grades of parchment will be placed in different fermentation tanks. The tanks are supposed to be shaded to protect the parchment from direct sunlight and rainfall, and also they are supposed to be clean to allow to ensure that there is no contamination of coffee. The completion of this process it normally takes 24 to 72 hours. So in areas which are warmer, it will take less time. In areas which are probably cold or during the cold season, it takes long. when fermentation is clean, coffee is cleaned. Coffee is supposed to be cleaned to ensure that any mucilage that could have been left is removed. And the process of fermentation is supposed to be closely monitored to ensure that coffee does not acquire any undesirable tastes or flavors. It's supposed to be done at the recommended time. If you overdo it, then coffee will acquire some colors, or coffee beans will acquire some colors which will lower the quality of the coffee. So the next stage after fermentation is where we do underwater soaking. So this soaking is done as a complete immersion of the parchment underwater. So soaking of the parchment after the fermentation is supposed to take 12 hours, and this helps in improvement of the coffee quality, both in terms of color and taste. The parchment is thoroughly washed to remove any the degraded mucilage and acids completely before soaking happens. So even during this process, there is also a grading that happens. So we call this final washing and grading. So coffee is passed through a channel and it's pushed using with wooden paddles against a stream of water, and then coffee here is graded. So it's passed through some gates, and these gates have different size, and they will only allow some certain size of beans to pass. So here coffee is graded into parchments 1, 2, 3 and lights. So this is second stage of grading. So there's as you see, grading also continues even in the future in the processes. So once this is done, the parchment is taken to dry, and normally this happens in open air. So it can be done by you can do machine drying, but the most cost effective is the one where you dry naturally in the air, and although it occupies a lot of space, it is cost effective. And then given that coffee grows in areas which experience sunlight almost throughout the year, it's very convenient and also cost effective. So freshly pulped coffee is dried in raised beds, as you can see in the picture, and at this stage the moisture content is around 60%, so it's supposed to be reduced up to 11%. So this will be done in several days, and normally it goes through several stages. One, we have the screen drying, white drying stage, soft black stage, hard black stage, and then there is the full dry and conditioning. So conditioning is done in ventilated stores or bins to allow even drying. So once you have ascertained that coffee beans have attained a moisture content of around 11 to 12%, then they're supposed to be kept indoors in areas where there is well controlled environment for the process to continue, and then to ensure that there is that even moisture. And also, if you keep it so long in the air, in the open, it might start cracking, and that reduces the quality of your coffee. So once conditioning is done, coffee is supposed to be stored temporarily before it is taken to the mills for the next process of milling. And mills are normally owned by private investors who have built mills, and then they charge farmers or factories or cooperatives some fees for the coffee to be processed. So out of this process, what you have gotten now is a parchment coffee, which is defined as the end product resulting from pulping, fermentation, washing and drying the fruit of the coffee cherry, and then this is what is taken to the mill for further processing. So the various products that comes out of this process, we have during the pulping, there are two products that come up out of that process. We have the skin, the fresh skin, which is used as manure. We have the parchment, which is further processed, and then we have the effluent water, which is supposed to be disposed in an area or disposed in a way that it won't affect the environment. So factories are supposed to ensure that they have built treatment facilities for processing these effluent before discharging it into the environment, because it has some qualities. It has high BOD and COD, and these can affect the quality of water, affecting aquatic life, and also making water not suitable for consumption. So care should be taken on how this wastewater is treated. So now we have the parchment coffee, which is ready to be taken through the next process. And parchment coffee here is now dry, and then it's ready for milling. So in milling, the process involves various phases, and the first thing that is done to the parchment coffee is feeding it into a hopper where pre-cleaning happens, and this involves removal of impurities that may have gotten into coffee during the drying process and during the other processing stage. So once this is done, the pre-cleaning is done, then there is another process called hulling, and this process removes the parchment layer from the coffee. So there is that skin here, it's removed, okay, so that you are left with those two beans which are clean. So to further ensure that no silver skin is left, polishing is done. Okay, it's passed through a machine, and beans will be cleaned to ensure that no further skin is left, because this can lower the quality of coffee. So the other step in milling is sorting and grading. So beans are sized by being passed through the series of screens. So there are 6 grades that are yielded in this process. We have AA, AB, PB as seen in the table. So what happens is that the larger the bean, the better the quality, and this process continues until you get beans in various sizes, and then these are the grades. The best grade is the one that has the largest beans. That's the best quality. Once milling has been done, then the next process is to taste coffee. So the graded coffee is then packed, and during each packaging stage there is regular tasting to check the flavor and quality of this coffee. So this process is called cupping, and it's done by experts. And in a milling plant, you find that there's a special room for this purpose, and experts in coffee tasting are the one who carry out this process. The next stage is roasting. So any unroasted coffee is known as the green coffee, not because of its color, but because it has not been roasted. So roasting is supposed to change the color of that bean to brown, and there are different types of roasts. We have the light, which is pale brown in color, we have the medium, which is mid brown in color, and then we have the dark, which is almost black in color. And roasting normally involves heating the coffee parchment or the coffee beans up to temperatures of 290 degrees Celsius, and during the process beans turn continuously, or you're supposed to turn the beans continuously to prevent burning and also to ensure that roasting is even. So first the beans will turn yellow, and the roasting aroma at this stage can be you can smell that aroma. And once the beans reach an internal temperature of around 200 degrees, it grows to double its size, turning from yellow to light brown. So the color keeps on changing as the temperature rises until it gets to rich brown and releases its own oil, own special oil called kafel. So the roasting process gives these beans its the flavor and aroma. So the darker the bean, the more intense the heating. And once you are done with this process, you are supposed to cool the coffee. So you can put this coffee in you can immerse it in water using a container to cool it. So roasting is not easy. It's an art. Actually, it's an art, and normally it takes years to perfect it. That's why it's recommended that coffee roasting should only be done by experts, because they do it well and they ensure that they give you the best quality. So once you have the roasted coffee as shown in those pictures, the next process is where you grind the coffee, or you ground it to give different flavors and different textures. So depending on the grinders that you use, you have different coffees that have different flavors and also texture. So you have that one that will make it so fine, and then depending on the what the customer wants. Okay, so the grounding will depend on how you want your coffee to be. Then once coffee is ground, you're supposed to store it properly to avoid contamination and also exposing it to air, because this will reduce the quality. Once coffee is ground, it's supposed to be packed to avoid contamination and also to avoid this coffee from getting in air getting in, and this can affect the quality of the coffee. So it's supposed to be done in the right containers. And once you buy this package of coffee, ensure that you keep it closed or locked to allow, because once air gets in or once you expose it to sun, then the flavor of that coffee will be impacted. So that's the whole journey of coffee, and as you look at this picture, that's how the process, right from the time when the berries are green, they ripen, they are pulped or crushed to remove the outer skin, they are dried in different stages until the bean has a moisture content of 12%, and then there is roasting, and then there's before roasting you have to mill to remove the silver skin, and then you do the polishing, and then finally you grade them so that you end up with the best quality of coffee. And then roasting happens, and this we said is supposed to be done by experts because they know how to do it, and roasting is an art, and when it's done by experts you get the best quality of coffee. And then once roasting is done, depending on preferences of the user, you can grind it, and this will give you the preferred uh, type of coffee. And you have those which are fine and those which are coarse. So depending on the preferences of the person who is taking it, you have those different types. And then packaging is supposed to be done properly to ensure that coffee is not contaminated, and also air does not get in, because this will affect the quality, more so the flavor of your coffee. So enjoy your cup of coffee now that you know the processes that it has taken. Now you enjoy it better, and enjoy your cup of coffee. Thank you.